Hi, it's Katrina. Ever wanted to know how to win an ancient war? You've come to the right place because the weapons I have for you today are out of this world. Catapults that can fire stone missiles, siege engines to bring down empires, and strategies so demented that no one has used them in thousands of years. Buckle up! The world's first hand grenades. Why settle for swords and arrows when you can introduce medieval chaos with a bang? Under the relentless sun of 12th century Jerusalem, knights clanked around in 80 pounds of armor. Peasants traded olives for cheese, and someone was lobbing hand grenades. Researchers now think some ancient ceramic pots weren't just holding perfume or olive oil. These clay pots were actually explosives. Meet the spheroconical vessel. Sounds fancy, right? These strange artifacts found from Cairo to Baghdad to Jerusalem have had scholars guessing for decades. Water jug? Fancy perfume bottle? Ancient incense kit? They weren't entirely sure. But now, a new analysis of 4 pot shards dug up between 1961 and 1967 from the Armenian garden in Jerusalem's Old City just turned up something way more explosive. Carney Matheson, molecular archaeologist from Griffith University, played medieval CSI with the residues inside these pots. His verdict is that one of them was probably packing homemade kaboom. 3 of the pots were boring. They held oils, perfumes, and medicines, basically what you'd expect anyway. But the 4th pot was very cool. Chemical tests showed high levels of sulfur, mercury, and magnesium. Not exactly your grandma's salad ingredients. This toxic cocktail screamed early explosive. Now, if you're thinking it's just early gunpowder, slow your camel. Gunpowder was kicking around in China as early as the 9th century. But Matheson's team says this Jerusalem pot likely had a different homemade recipe. It's a local flavor that wasn't exactly gunpowder, but it could still explode. However, the Arabs and the Chinese both had ancient stone and clay pots they would fill with gunpowder that they used during the Middle Ages. It was quite the era of explosives. There are even historical accounts of grenades being used during the 1187 siege of Jerusalem. The accounts mention loud, flashing, bottle-thrown weapons. And guess what matches the size, shape, and angry energy of those descriptions? Yep, spheroconical pots. One theory is that they might have been filled with something similar to Greek fire, the ancient world's mystery napalm. I won't be getting into Greek fire today, but I have talked about it in other videos, so be sure to browse all our videos about advanced ancient technology on Origins Explained. The ancients used gunpowder, incendiary liquids, and dangerous gases to destroy their enemy. While grenades might seem like a modern invention, people have been tossing containers full of explosives for over 1,000 years. The catapult from hell. Archaeologists have just found the ammunition from a catapult that is 800 years old. You would not want to be on the receiving end of this formidable weapon. You would 100% be crushed like a bug. It was just another day in rainy England. One minute, workers were trying to make a castle more accessible. The next, they were digging up medieval artillery. At Kenilworth Castle in Warwickshire, workers unearthed 8 stone catapult shots. Some of these catapult shots are small enough to be juggling balls. Others are big enough to crush your midlife crisis sports car. Seriously, the largest one weighed 231 pounds. You don't want to catch that, but what were they doing outside Kenilworth Castle? Well, what do you think they were doing? The giant stones had been used in the siege almost 1,000 years earlier. According to Kathy Coates from Archaeology Warwickshire, the shots were found pretty much where they would have fallen. This allowed researchers to figure out where the medieval siege camps were located. In 1266, King Henry III's brother-in-law, Simon de Montfort, led a gang of rebel nobles who had the nerve to take control of Kenilworth Castle. Then Montfort was killed at the Battle of Evesham, but his die-hard fans wouldn't leave Kenilworth. When diplomacy failed, and by failed I mean the rebels mailed back the king's messenger's severed hand, Henry decided it was catapult o'clock. What followed was a 172-day siege. The siege included 9 siege engines, including catapults and massive trebuchets, 60,000 crossbow bolts in the king's arsenal, and 14-foot-thick castle walls. In the end, 6 months of starving and disease killed off the rebels. You have to wonder, with a stone catapult like the one the king had, why did it take so long? According to Will Wyeth from English Heritage, some stone projectiles at Kenilworth were so deadly that one missile took out an entire wooden siege tower packed with 200 crossbowmen. These rocks weren't just oversized skipping stones, they were medieval missiles. How many other civilizations do you think had giant stone rockets before the invention of gunpowder? And now for a quick break because it's shout-out time! I want to give a huge shout out and thank you to Karen Graham and Douglas Rose for supporting this channel. Remember, we post a video every day, so be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out. The devastating Roman Corvus. Ever wonder how a land-based power became the master of the seas? It all started with the brutal, transformative clash of the First Punic War. Rome wanted the Mediterranean. Carthage already had it. The only way Rome was getting it was by besting the Carthaginian navy. The problem was that Rome's navy was about as experienced as a toddler steering a shopping cart. They needed a way to turn a water fight into a fist fight. Carthage had centuries of sailing swagger. Rome had really good infantry and had one really good idea. It was called the Corvus. The Corvus was a giant, terrifying, spike-tipped plank that turned ship-to-ship fighting into personal, messy, up-close mayhem. Rome went into battle with wooden bridges mounted at the front of their ships. When they got near an enemy vessel, the Corvus dropped like a guillotine onto the enemy deck. The spike sank deep, locking ships together. Congratulations! You are now stuck with angry Roman soldiers storming your boat. Hope you stretched this morning, Carthaginians. Naval battles suddenly became brutal assaults. As long as a Roman ship could get close enough to use the Corvus, the Carthaginians were short on luck. The Battle of Mylae in 260 BC was the first real test of the Corvus. It worked flawlessly, and Rome won the battle. At the Battle of Ecnomus in 256 BC, which, by the way, was one of the largest naval battles ever fought, Rome won again with the Corvus, once more turning ship battles into floating fistfights. Of course, not every engagement went well. The Corvus made ships top-heavy. In 255 BC, when a storm hit off the coast of Sicily, Roman ships loaded with a Corvus got slapped around like kids at a bounce house. Over 100 Roman ships sank. Even so, Rome came out the true winners. By the end of the First Punic War, Rome finally figured out shipbuilding, partly by stealing Carthaginian designs like college students copying homework. They still had 2 more Punic Wars to go before Carthage would be pushed into the back of the history books. Without the Corvus, the Roman Empire may have never taken off the way it did. The ultimate siege engine. The sun blazed down on the battered island of Rhodes, the kind of heat that could bake bread on a shield. Dust clouds billowed as 3,400 sweaty guys in sandals pushed the ancient world's version of a bulldozer on steroids towards the city walls. It was a towering, ironclad beast that looked like a medieval death condo, designed to flatten anything stupid enough to stand in its way. This was the siege engine to end all sieges, the Helepolis. It was also called the Taker of Cities. Now, that's a name I can get behind. Unfortunately for the Greek mad lads who built this tank on stilts, it did not level the city of Rhodes like they wanted it to. It ended up doing a faceplant instead and helping to build one of the 7 wonders of the world. But more on that in a second. First, let's check out the genius behind this machine. Meet Polydius of Thessaly, ancient Greece's answer to a mad scientist. He and other tech whizzes like Demetrius I of Macedon and Epimachus of Athens threw their brains together to create the Helepolis during the siege of Rhodes in 305 BC. Picture a mobile skyscraper of doom, 130 feet tall, 65 feet wide, and weighing 160 tons. Its body was covered in iron plates because Greek engineers weren't about to let some DIY fire arrows ruin their day. The inside was multiple floors stocked with soldiers, catapults, and enough heavy artillery to start a small war. It had 8 wheels, each the size of an NBA player. 3,400 men had to haul it around, which basically made it the world's first gym membership. It had catapults on every floor, from baby 30-pounders to whopping 180-pound rock throwers. and the walls had shutters that could open to launch missiles. Oh, and if you're dying to see it in real life, the Thessaloniki Science Center has a replica. Go check it out the next time you're in Greece. Now let's check back in on the siege of Rhodes. The Rhodians decided that fighting a 160-ton juggernaut with swords was frankly dumb. Instead, they weaponized sewage. Yeah, sewage. Mud, water, and human waste were used to flood the ground so that the Heliopolis would sink faster than your dignity at karaoke night. And it worked. Ancient writer Vitruvius reported that the mighty tower got stuck like a giant shopping cart in wet cement. Then, to add insult to injury, the Rhodians ripped the iron plates off the tower and the Greeks abandoned it. Now, here's where the story gets good. Instead of tossing the abandoned metal into the ocean or opening a chain of ironic souvenir shops, the Rhodians melted it all down. They sold the leftover weapons, pooled the cash, and put it all towards building a giant statue of Helios, the sun god. The result was the Colossus of Rhodes, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. The Titan was built from the bones of a failed siege engine. It just goes to show that bigger isn't always better. Dracula's vicious tactics. When people hear the name Dracula, most picture a pale vampire creeping through misty castles, thanks to Bram Stoker's 1897 horror novel. But the legend of Dracula has roots in a real and arguably even more terrifying historical figure. Behind the cape and the fangs, there was a real person who inspired the legend. And in this case, truth is bloodier than fiction. Vlad III, better known as Vlad the Impaler, didn't drink blood like in the stories. He spilled it by the thousands in real life, earning a reputation that still makes horror writers sit up and take notes. His war tactics were so gruesome, I don't think YouTube will let me talk about them, but here we go. We'll start with the safe stuff. Vlad was born in 1431 in the rough mountainous region of Transylvania, modern-day Romania. His father, Vlad II Dracula, was a member of the prestigious Order of the Dragon, a military fraternity sworn to defend Christendom from Ottoman invasion. That Dracula name would pass to his son as Dracula, literally meaning son of the dragon. At the time, Wallachia and Transylvania were caught in a meat grinder between Christian Europe and the Muslim Ottoman Empire. In 1442, Vlad II made a fateful decision. He met with Sultan Murad II, bringing young Vlad III and his brother Radu along. The meeting turned out to be a trap. Vlad II was released, but his 2 boys stayed behind as hostages, political bargaining chips to keep Wallachia obedient. When Vlad III finally returned to Wallachia, he wasn't just seeking a throne, he was seeking vengeance. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, the Ottomans were hungry to push further into Europe. Vlad seized the moment in 1456, leading a bold charge to reclaim Wallachia. Legend says he personally beheaded his rival, Vladislav II, in single combat. With Wallachia back under his control, Vlad set about cleaning house. To solidify his rule, he famously invited hundreds of Wallachia's treacherous boyars to a lavish banquet. Once the wine was flowing, he had them all stabbed and impaled, a grim message to anyone thinking about rebellion. This is the gruesome tactic I came here to talk about. The tactic was psychological warfare against anyone who would double-cross Vlad. Victims were hoisted onto sharpened or rounded poles, which were inserted vertically through the body, designed specifically to avoid major organs so that death would come slowly, sometimes over days. You think crucifixion sucked? Being impaled was worse, and it happened to a lot of people. But for all of his brutality, Vlad did bring stability to his ravaged lands. Trade resumed, crime rates plummeted, and Wallachia finally had a ruler who could scare even the most hardened criminals into submission. It's hard to steal bread when you're worried about a sharp stick mixing up your intestines. By the time of his death, Vlad had an astronomical body count, an estimated 80,000 dead with around 20,000 impaled and put on gruesome display outside the city of a name I can't pronounce. Just imagine the stench of it and the fear. When Ottoman Sultan Mehmed II marched in to take the city, he was greeted by a miles-long horror show of rotting bodies and crows picking at the dead. Legend says Mehmed took one look, turned around, and decided Wallachia just wasn't worth it. Brutal, gross, painful, but hugely effective. Impaling 20,000 people and erecting them like bad Halloween decorations outside your castle works. So do what you will with that information. Vlad's bloody career ended in 1476 when he and a small band of soldiers were ambushed. He was killed and beheaded, his head sent to Constantinople to be displayed over the gates. What do you think? Was it a fitting end for a madman? How cats took down an empire. The Egyptian desert shimmered under the ruthless sun, and near the mouth of the Nile, two armies stared each other down. On one side was Egypt, ancient, proud, and dripping with centuries of tradition. On the other side was Persia, ambitious, organized, and not here to play games. And in the middle of it all, cats. Cats proved to be the secret weapon that helped Persia conquer Egypt in 525 BC. It was, really, the beginning of the end for ancient Egypt. So let's talk felines. Ancient Egyptians didn't just like cats, they worshipped them. Life in all its forms was sacred, from papyrus reeds to stray alley cats. Sure, they hunted and meat showed up on royal tables, but for the most part, Egyptians treated animals like they were the founding members of PETA. The goddess Bastet, protector of homes, women, children, and cats, held a major role in everyday life. She was fierce when necessary, but mostly stood for domestic peace and prosperity. She was also depicted as, you guessed it, a cat. Harming a cat during this time was a death penalty offense. This is in stark contrast to the Christians who, if I remember correctly, started the plague by massacring every cat they could find in Europe. If your house caught fire in Egypt, you didn't save your gold, you saved the cat. If your cat died of natural causes, you mourned it by shaving your eyebrows. Cats were even buried with jewelry and mummified like royalty. The bottom line is that cats were sacred, and Cambyses II, king of Persia, knew it. According to Herodotus, history's gossip columnist, it all kicked off when Cambyses II sent a marriage request to Pharaoh Amasis, asking to marry his daughter. Amasis, not thrilled about marrying off his kid to a foreign king, pulled a fast one. He sent the daughter of a previous pharaoh instead. It might have been okay if Cambyses II never found out, but he did. And how did he react? He invaded Egypt. When Amasis died, his son Psamatich III inherited the throne, and with it, a Persian army breathing down his neck. At around 6 months into his reign, Psamatich III rallied defenses at Pelusium, fortified Memphis, and crossed his fingers. Things looked bad from the beginning. Greek mercenaries were supposed to help, but they bailed. Psamatich's best advisor defected and joined the Persians. Still, P III set up solid defenses at Pelusium and braced for battle. His army was ready, his walls were strong, he had the spirit. What he didn't have was a plan for weaponized kittens. As the story goes, Cambyses II knew that brute force wouldn't be enough. So he ordered his soldiers to paint images of Bastet on their shields and drive live animals in front of them. Animals like cats, dogs, sheep, ibises, anything furry or fuzzy that could be wrangled. The Egyptians were shocked. They didn't attack, they didn't shoot any arrows. Hurting a cat would mean eternal damnation, a fate worse than death. They would succumb to the enemy before accidentally killing a cat. The Egyptian front line crumbled, soldiers panicked, fled, or surrendered rather than risk hurting the animals. The Persians slaughtered the defenders and chased the survivors back to Memphis. Memphis fell soon after. Psamatich III was captured and later executed. Egypt's independence crumbled. Persia annexed Egypt, rolling it into their own growing empire. Except for brief rebellions and scant moments of freedom, Egypt would be passed around for the next few centuries like a hot potato between Persians, Greeks, and eventually Romans. The Battle of Pelusium wasn't just a military loss, it was a gut punch to Egypt's soul. The Egyptians surrendered their country rather than betray their values. Their loyalty to their gods and traditions ran so deep that even survival came second. The early Korean rocket launcher. In the smoky chaos of medieval battlefields where swords clanged and arrows darkened the skies, Korea rolled out something a little different. They had a two-wheeled cart of pure explosive mayhem called the hwacha, packed with enough firepower to make even samurai think twice. Nicknamed the Fire Chariot, the hwacha became a star player during the brutal Imjin War of the late 1500s, when Japan tried and failed to conquer Korea. But I mean, come on, who wouldn't second-guess charging into a wall of flaming rocket arrows? The hwacha was a big wooden cart on wheels with a flat board full of holes. Each hole was stuffed with a singijyan. A singijyan was an ancient rocket arrow powered by gunpowder. Just one was essentially a mini rocket. The hwacha enabled the Korean army to shoot 100 of those rockets at once, raining down death on the enemy. Later models were even scarier, firing up to 200 rockets per round. You know how terrifying a 4th of July fireworks finale can look? Now imagine it aimed at your face on a battlefield. Did you know that gunpowder reached Korea by the 14th century? Genius inventor Cho Museon cracked the recipe despite China's best efforts to keep it a secret. At first, Cho and his son Hae-san kept the gunpowder monopoly tight, but soon everyone was in on the boom business. By the mid-1400s, King Mujian ordered hwachas manufactured in bulk for border defense. You couldn't invade Korea without rockets flying at you, which the Japanese learned the hard way at the Battle of Haengju in 1593. Japan, under Toyotomi Hideyoshi, decided Korea would make a lovely extension of the Japanese Empire. One of the most epic defenses of the Japanese invasion happened at Haengju Fortress. 3,000 Koreans defending a hilltop fort against 30,000 Japanese attackers charging again and again. 9 separate assaults were all repelled because perched on the fortress walls were 40 hwachas, all ready to unleash hellfire every time the Japanese soldiers got too close. The rockets tore through enemy ranks, leaving chaos and casualties. It wasn't just a tactical win. It shattered Japanese morale and proved that Korea could hit back hard. Like many medieval war inventions, the hwacha eventually became obsolete. As guns got better, artillery got heavier, and battlefields changed, the old fire chariot rolled off into history. The Quaker Gun. I'd like to start my introduction to the Quaker Gun with a quote from Private Edgar Warfield from the 17th Virginia Infantry Regiment around 1861. He once said, "We'd roll a log into the road, pretend to load it, point it at the enemy, and they'd panic, thinking we had real artillery." Edgar was describing the Quaker Gun, a classic battlefield scam using painted logs, wagon wheels, and nothing else but audacity. Just like Edgar explained, he took a log, painted it black, set it on some wagon wheels to look real, and intimidated the enemy into getting scared and making mistakes. First used during the American Revolution, Quaker guns became the go-to trick during the Civil War, when real artillery was too expensive. They were named after the pacifist religious group the Quakers, since it was a gun that didn't technically kill anyone. After the First Battle of Manassas on July 21, 1861, Confederate troops under Colonel J.E.B. Stuart parked themselves 6 miles from Washington, D.C. at Munson's Hill. Stuart didn't have enough cannons to defend their position, so fake it till you make it. Stuart built towering earthworks, raised signal stations, and filled his trenches with Quaker guns. Meanwhile, General James Longstreet got even craftier, mounting stovepipes on old wagon wheels to make formidable-looking batteries. From afar, it looked like D.C. was about to be shelled into oblivion. Union General George McClellan spent 2 nervous months drilling the Army of the Potomac while Thaddeus Lowe's balloons spied from above, spotting what looked like Confederate heavy artillery. Newspapers in Washington freaked out when Confederates flew a massive flag over Munson's Hill, visible all the way from the Navy Yard. Eventually, the Confederates pulled out, leaving their Quaker guns behind. When Union troops moved in and realized they'd been scared off by logs, let's just say they weren't very happy. Funnily enough, even the original Quakers, as in the religious group, used fake guns. During the War of 1812, British ships were raiding New Jersey's Reed Beach. The Quaker locals, determined to defend their goods without violence, set up logs to look like cannons peeking out of the bushes. The British took one look, thought twice, and sailed away. No shots fired, and mission accomplished. I guess if there has to be a moral to this story, it's don't underestimate a good bluff. Feels like a good time to start a poker game. It's also a good time to hit that subscribe button. The amazing history of war elephants. Across a steaming jungle, a hulking gray shadow emerges through the mist, tusks gleaming, feet pounding the earth like a living earthquake. It's not a dinosaur, it's an elephant. And 3,000 years ago, it was the ancient world's idea of a tank. If you think seeing a spider in your bathtub is terrifying, imagine an elephant with spiked tusks charging straight at your army. No thank you. Elephants weren't just giant scream machines. They were the Uber XL of the battlefield. Need to move heavy stuff, transport troops, flatten a few enemies along the way? Use your war elephant. Some even carried fancy little canopied thrones called howdahs with archers and javelin throwers riding shotgun, turning them into medieval monster trucks. Breeding elephants was expensive and complicated, so armies trapped wild male elephants, the grumpiest, most aggressive ones they could find. In India, they lured the males into traps using lady elephants as bait. Then they had to train them, which is like training a bear to do ballet. It's possible, but there were no guarantees the elephant wouldn't maul its trainer. There were a few different elephants in ancient armies. The Asian elephant was smaller, smarter, cute, but deadly. The African savanna elephant was an absolute unit, standing up to 13 feet tall. The forest elephant was shorter and sneakier. But the MVP was the now extinct North African elephant. It was a true beast on the battlefield, a tank made of flesh and blood. In 331 BC, at the Battle of Gaugamela, Alexander the Great faced off against Persian King Darius III and his 15 war elephants. Macedonian soldiers were gaping at the elephants like they just saw Bigfoot riding a unicycle. Despite the tusked terror, Alexander pulled off the win. A few years later, in 326 BC, Alexander marched into India, where King Porus welcomed him with a gift of 100 very angry elephants. This time, Alexander knew the drill. He had his men throw a bunch of javelins to confuse the elephants, then watch them stomp out their own soldiers. After that, elephants became the Pokemon cards of the ancient world. Everyone wanted one. And of course, you can't talk about war elephants without bringing up Hannibal Barca, the guy who drove his army of elephants across the Alps. He moved 37 of them from Spain over the Alps into Italy. However, not all of them made it. It turns out elephants are terrible at mountain climbing. Even Julius Caesar had to deal with war elephants during the Battle of Thapsus in 46 BC. But by then, Romans were old pros. They had arrows, slingers, and guys ready to chop at elephant legs like it was a weirdly dangerous piñata party. After winning, the Romans were so impressed they made the elephant the mascot of the 5th Legion. This was the end of elephants in major wars, partly because the northern African elephant went extinct, thanks humans, and also partly because the trick wasn't interesting anymore. Armies knew how to defeat elephants. They'd become a larger threat to their own soldiers than the opposing army. Though I will say that in World War I, elephants hauled artillery. They didn't fight, but they were used as beasts of burden. And in World War II, Japanese and British forces used elephants to build roads and sneak supplies through jungles. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong even used elephants to move gear through the forests. As cool as all of this is in a historical sense, can we please hope the days of abusing elephants and sending animals into the battlefield is over? Thank you. The technology that broke history. At the dawn of 1453, the city of Constantinople still stood proud, wrapped in thick medieval walls that had outlived empires, crushed 20 sieges, and survived more attempted invasions than your favorite fast food chain has health violations. For over 1,000 years, the Byzantines dared anyone to come at them. And everyone did, but none succeeded. Constantinople was invincible, up until Sultan Mehmed II showed up with a cannon so big it could hit God up in the clouds. While Europe was still playing with swords and arrows, the Ottomans had a different idea. They would build a cannon so big it needed its own postal code. They dubbed this monster Basilica. It was a 27-foot monster made of bronze that could fire a 1,500-pound stone ball. The mastermind behind it was Orban, a Hungarian engineer with a knack for scaring city planners. Orban had offered his services to the Byzantines first, but they, in peak bad life choices form, said no thanks, because of their invincible walls. So Orban crossed the field to Sultan Mehmed II, who hired him on the spot. Orban built the cannon, then it had to be dragged 140 miles to Constantinople at a blistering pace of 2 miles per day. That's actually pretty good considering it took 200 men and 60 oxen to move the thing. When Basilica finally fired, the ground shook like a medieval EDM concert. Eyewitnesses described a terrifying roar, a violent shaking of the earth, and flames that lit up the sky. At first, the cannon worked like a charm. Stone balls smashed into Constantinople's walls, leaving craters, toppling towers, and occasionally flying clean over the wall to wreck someone's living room. But early cannon technology was about as reliable as a used car with 3 tires. Basilica had a terrible cooling problem. After each shot, it took hours to cool down. Some days, the weapon was more of a giant paperweight than a city smasher. Then things got worse. Repeated firings cracked the barrel. Crews patched it with iron rings and slathered it in warm oil like a really dangerous spa treatment. But still, the great Basilica split apart mid-shot, killing several nearby gunners. The greatest cannon ever built was a huge failure in the end and a disaster for the Ottomans' HR department. But the Ottomans had other cannons. They didn't keep all their eggs in one basket. For nearly 50 straight days, the Ottomans bombarded Constantinople. 55,000 pounds of gunpowder went up in smoke. Over 5,000 stones slammed into the walls. All the while, inside the city, morale cratered. Finally, on May 29, 1453, with cannons still blasting, the Ottomans stormed the city. Constantinople, the mighty 1,000-year-old holdout, fell. And it fell hard. Soon, it even had a new name, Istanbul. Did Basilica single-handedly win the war? Not exactly. The cannon cracked long before the walls crumbled for good, and it was just one part of a broader siege strategy. But the psychological impact of watching gigantic stones tear apart your invincible defenses was brutal. Before the walls fell, the people in the city had lost all hope. Even after the big gun's failure, the Ottomans stayed obsessed with super cannons. In 1464, engineer Munir Ali built the Dardanelles gun, another monster cannon. Believe it or not, it was still firing in 1807 when it blasted British ships trying to sneak into Turkish waters. A medieval cannon, 340 years old, scored 28 casualties. Not bad for ancient artillery.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed. Excalibur.
Archaeologists in Europe have just discovered a 700-year-old sword that was stuck in a rock at the bottom of a lake. It's being called Excalibur, with experts comparing it to the mythical weapon of the legendary King Arthur, one of my favorite stories.
According to the legend, King Arthur pulled his magical Excalibur from the stone from which it was forged. And while there are still historical questions over whether King Arthur ever existed or not, experts may have just found his sword. It was discovered submerged near the small village of Rakovic in northern Bosnia and Herzegovina, and the sword was literally driven into a solid chunk of rock, sitting 36 feet beneath the surface of the water. Ivana Panzic was a local archaeologist involved in the recovery of the sword. She said it took significant care for the professionals to physically remove the sword from the stone it was stuck in. However, it wasn't nearly as difficult as the legends say.
This is now the first medieval sword found in the area, with nobody really sure where it came from. Analysis of the metal shows it was crafted sometime in the 13th century.
That was at a time when the nearby medieval village was built around a mighty castle where Bosnian rulers lived. The castle is now ruined, though, because it was destroyed in 1777. The sword may have had something to do with the nobility who lived in the area. It could have even been part of an ancient battle. And there is also the very slim possibility that it did indeed belong to King Arthur himself.
And now for number 9. But first, it's shout-out time. Big thank you to Kelly Smith for this super thanks. We appreciate your support, and it actually makes a difference. If you are new here, be sure to subscribe and join us. You won't regret it.
The Spear of Longinus. The Spear of Longinus was the weapon used to stab none other than Jesus Christ himself. The ancient Christian artifact is also called the Holy Lance, and it's about as real as the Holy Grail. Nobody knows for certain if this spear ever existed, or where it is now. According to the Bible, specifically the Gospel of John, the Spear of Longinus stabbed Jesus Christ in the side while he was being crucified. He was prodded with the weapon like somebody might probe a piece of meat on the grill to see if it's done. The Gospel of John says Jesus was stabbed with a spear so that the guards could make sure he was already dead before they took down his body. The spear was named after Longinus, the Roman soldier who carried out the stabbing. What's really interesting is that even though most Christians recognize the name Longinus, he was never mentioned in the Bible itself. He was only named in the Gospel of Nicodemus, one of the forbidden books of the Bible authored around the 4th century AD. Nobody knows if the name was real or made up by whoever wrote the text. Assuming the spear was a real weapon, what happened to it? The Roman Catholic Church says the Spear of Longinus is in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. There is a relic here that was supposedly taken from Jerusalem in the 5th century AD. But do you truly believe that the Vatican has the Spear of Longinus? Let us all know in the comments. Hama-yumi. The Hama-yumi is a sacred Japanese bow that's believed to have the power to banish evil. It was a real weapon used for centuries, and maybe even one of the oldest weapons in the Japanese arsenal. Ancient depictions of Emperor Jimmu show him wielding a similar-looking bow, suggesting its originals could be almost 3,000 years old. Jimmu was the first emperor of Japan, and he ascended to the throne in 660 BC. According to Japanese myth, Emperor Jimmu was the physical human descendant of the sun goddess Amaterasu. For the centuries to come after his death, the emperors of Japan believed themselves to have the blood of gods pumping through their veins. The sacred bow comes to us from a different legend though. An imperial palace was once taken over by a demon. The emperor in this particular story became sick because of the demon's foul magic. Priests failed to banish the demon from the castle, so everyone was at a loss. But then, a skilled archer by the name Minamoto no Yoribasa showed up to the palace and vanquished the demon using his bow and arrow. The bow was called Hama-yumi, or evil destroying bow. Ever since, the Hama-yumi has been a major part of Buddhist and Shinto rituals. It's believed that even just pulling on the bowstring has the power to frighten evil spirits and ghosts. These were popular weapons throughout feudal Japan to defend shrines and temples from any evil entities. They were largely decorative, but could still be used in real combat. The Sword of Saint Michael. Archangel Michael is one of the most popular characters in every version of the Bible. Michael is the protector of heaven, soldier of God, and guardian of the church. Different stories have Michael doing different holy things, but he's almost always the angel who helps God defeat Lucifer. He's not only honored in Christianity, but also in Judaism and Islam. Archangel Michael is the patron saint of soldiers, spiritual warfare, and those that are dying. Now let's take a look at the legendary Sword of Saint Michael. It isn't a real weapon, but an imaginary line that stretches from Ireland to Israel. The line traces a series of shrines, all named after Michael. According to legend, this sacred line, or invisible sword, was used to defeat Satan. The line stretches from Ireland through France, Italy, and Greece, and finally ends in Israel at the Stella Maris Monastery. There are approximately 7 sanctuaries found along the line of St. Michael's sword. It's amazing because none of these sanctuaries were constructed at the same time or by the same people, yet they form a perfectly straight line between Ireland and Israel. Many biblical experts believe the straight line is meant to be a warning to all Christians that they need to walk this straight path. The line is also supposed to represent the final blow that Michael gave to the devil when he sent him to hell. The Keris. The Keris is a very real dagger that originated in Java, Indonesia. It's a double-edged weapon used in rituals, and it's absolutely brimming with spiritual meaning. These mystical blades can be found in Malaysia, Thailand, Singapore, and even the Philippines. They were widely distributed throughout the Majapahit Empire in the 13th century, although the oldest of them are over 2,300 years old. The dagger appeared in the ancient Cham areas of Cambodia around 300 BC and were also utilized by the Dong Son culture that ruled in Vietnam at the same time. The Keris dagger wasn't made using traditional blacksmith techniques. It could only be forged from the purest iron by a master craftsman. But the dagger involved a little more than just pounding iron with a big hammer. There was a complex ritual involved that was supposed to bind the dagger with the spirit world, imbuing it with magical power. Not all of these blades look the same. After all, these sacred knives have been crafted for thousands of years, meaning they've come in a lot of different forms. In Indonesian folktales, blades can possess either good or bad luck. Some were forged for magical purposes, while others were made strictly to invoke the power of the spirits. It was even believed that the blade needed to be fed spirit energy each month, or it would lose its power. David's sling.
For 40 days, Goliath the Philistine challenged the Israelis, but nobody dared to fight him because he was, according to the Bible, an actual giant. It wasn't until little David appeared with his measly slingshot that Goliath was finally stopped. Even though Goliath stood much taller than David, the young man's bravery and faith in God allowed him to kill the giant with a single stone to the forehead.
But how real is this tale? The historical accuracy is a source of hot debate for biblical scholars. However, scientists say there is no doubt that David could have easily killed Goliath by hitting him in the right place. Assuming Goliath was a real man of exceptional height, and David was using an ordinary sling, physics worked in David's favor. A sling with two straps, made taut by swinging it around in a circle to accumulate kinetic energy, could have released the stone at a rapid speed. Scientists have estimated the sling hurled the stone at roughly 62 miles per hour. It could have killed someone from as far as 600 feet away. For David, standing right before Goliath, a well-placed shot would have easily killed the giant. There was a reason biblical armies marched into battles with slings instead of bows and arrows. Even with a full suit of leather armor, a measly stone of about 1 ounce could penetrate and kill an enemy like a modern bullet. In ancient armies, men armed with slings were usually grouped behind archers because they had better range. The Muramasa sword. The Muramasa is a special Japanese sword that isn't much different from the Indonesian keris in that it was believed to be magical. On the outside, the Muramasa looks like any other Japanese sword. The only difference is that the very metal that was used to create it was imbued with mythical elements. The Muramasa sword dates back to around the 16th century, with the oldest surviving example from 1501. The sword led to the creation of a legendary swordsmith named Muramasa. He and his swords were coveted across Japan, and he created his own school of sword making that lasted an estimated 3 generations. The truth behind the man and his swords is vague at best. What we know is that he was seen as one of the best swordsmiths in Japan, but people also believed Muramasa's swords were imbued with a magical curse that made them particularly effective against the Tokugawa shogunate. Rumor began to spread that the swordsmith was a violent man who was well beyond the point of madness. His blades were even said to hunger for blood and compel those who wielded them to commit atrocities. These were demonic blades, cursed to grant exceptional strength at the cost of bloodlust. But of course, that's all just legend. What few Muramasa blades remain today are either in private collections or housed in museums. One such sword is on display at the Tokyo National Museum. Saint Galgano's sword. During the 12th century, Galgano Guidotti was a rich Italian known for his hedonism and his exceptional violence. He was a warmongering lunatic, a sinner who changed his ways after being visited by the Archangel Michael. The visit from the angel turned Galgano from an evil man into a fighter for God. He then moved to the middle of nowhere and became a hermit. When he reached the place where he'd spend the remainder of his life in isolation, he was led to the top of the hill by an angelic voice in his head. When he arrived at the peak, he thrust his sword, which was stained with the blood of his past life, into a stone. The weapon was then embedded inside the rock, and Galgano lived the rest of his life in stoic peace. He eventually became a saint and was officially canonized by Pope Urban III. After his death in the year 1182, a church was constructed over the place where Galgano stabbed his sword into the rock. The sword in the stone is still there today. It's the centerpiece of the Montesiepi Chapel, protected by a plexiglass barrier. This is one of the greatest mysteries that scientists have never been able to solve. There is really a sword stuck in the stone, something that should be impossible. Without modern technology, there is no way someone would have been able to stick a rusty piece of iron 2 feet into a rock. And yet it's there in Italy right now for everyone to see. Some believe the sword is physical proof of God's power, and that it confirms the story of Saint Galgano. Sigurd's blade. Sigurd is one of the greatest heroes from Norse mythology. According to legend, Sigurd used his mighty Gram sword to slay the dragon Fafnir. Norse folklore says the sword has been around for an extremely long time and has been wielded by many different owners. The sword was once handled by Hildebrand and by Sigurd's father Sigmund as well. The sword first appeared in the Volsunga saga of the 13th century. Sigmund received the mighty weapon from Odin himself, who thrust the sword into a tree that magically sprouted from the floor of the mead hall. Odin said that any man who could retrieve the sword from the tree could keep it as a gift. Every single man in the hall failed, but then Sigmund retrieved it as if taking a blade from a hot stick of butter. It's basically the same story of King Arthur retrieving the sword of Excalibur. The difference is that the sword was passed on to Sigmund's son, Sigurd, who went on to slay a dragon. But after Sigurd's death, there is no mention of this sword anywhere. It may have been nothing more than a weapon in a story, but it could have also been a real sword. It wasn't that unusual for Vikings to pass powerful weapons down from father to son. There may have been one particularly deadly sword passed on through generations, a sword embedded with gold that shone brilliantly in the sun.
And here's another thing that you might not know. Sigurd was believed to be a real person who lived during the 9th century AD at the peak of the Viking Age. He very well may have received the Gram sword from his father, then lost the weapon after his death. But it's still up for debate whether he really did fight the dragon.
The Flaming Sword. The Flaming Sword is a supernatural weapon that's talked about in the Bible. The Holy Book says a flaming sword was entrusted to a cherub, one of God's angelic attendants. With the flaming sword in hand, the cherub was ordered to guard the gates of paradise. This was after Adam and Eve were banished from the Garden of Eden. Biblical scholars have interpreted the sword as being a real weapon, a bolt of lightning, or nothing but a metaphor. Some have even said the sword's weird description, flame of the whirling sword, relates to a chariot wheel rigged with blades. The Eastern Orthodox Church believes that after Jesus was crucified, the flaming sword was taken from the Garden of Eden so that no more humans could enter paradise. In the Jewish Kabbalah, the flaming sword is a representation of order itself. In the Gnostic religion, it's predicted that during the end of days, great kings will wield flaming swords. Thanks for watching! Which of these mythical weapons would you like to get your hands on the most? Let us all know in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. See you next time. Bye!